Hey, my name's Paul O'Donoghue, and I was an electrician that couldn't sell to save my life. And now I help companies that generate between 5 to 100 million scale their business by 37% per annum. Now, I started in South Auckland from a spare bedroom at my house, and I grew this global brand. I went from being a Sparky to a SalesSTAR, and I'm the typical overnight success that took 20 years, and this is my story.
Okay, let's go.
So I started my apprenticeship at Ford Motor Company in Wiri, Auckland. I had this burning desire to have my own business, but what was happening is that I was continuously seeing tradespeople struggle. And it wasn't through a lack of good knowledge and their technical ability. It was because they were lacking good business skills and good sales skills, and they weren't working smart. They were lowballing each other, they were undercutting each other, and they were going broke. And I thought to myself, there must be a better way than going through the struggles of being a tradesperson that fundamentally doesn't know about business. I thought there must be a better way. And so what I decided to do was another apprenticeship of sorts. I decided to go into corporate sales, and my first professional job was as a sales engineer. And the interesting thing about that, they obviously selected me because I had 10 years of industrial electrical background, but I started the job, and on day one, they literally handed me the keys. They said, here's the keys, here's the car, you're a sales guy, get out there and sell. And no induction process, no nothing, didn't know what I was doing. I really felt like a bloody goldfish climbing a tree. I was that uncomfortable. I was literally a tradesperson in a suit. I didn't know what I was doing. It took me a while to really unpack and be comfortable with selling. And the really big shift here, there was several big shifts, and one of the big shifts was I realized sales was a process and it was a system, and I related it back to the Kanban manufacturing process in Ford Motor Company. Now, in the Kanban process, when they manufacture a car, everything has stations. Like you have the just-in-time system, you have the right screws, the right processes in every part, and you have a person on every stage of the process, and nothing gets moved until that stage is completed. And then that was a big shift in my thinking, because for the first 3 months in sales, I was doing a lot of talking, I was going out to site visits, it felt like I was doing a lot of work. But at the end of the day, I'd step back and I had nothing to show for it. Unlike being an electrician, you're always working with your hands, and at the end of the day, you can see the fruits of your labor. When I realized that sales was a process, I was able to take my previous conversations and unpack that and put it into every stage of the process: lead generation, site visit, proposal, closing stage. And then all of a sudden I could actually see all of these deals in the pipeline, and I could start to visibly understand that sales was a process. And from there, I could actually understand what part of the deals and the processes I needed to focus on to move through the sales process. Later, I'll learn how to engineer sales success using those KPIs to plan, to help scale and get to certain budgets, and also how to forecast more accurately. Now, the other big shift I had in thinking is the realization that it wasn't just tradespeople that sucked at selling. It was actually a lot of technical people, or a lot of technical professions, whether you're an architect, whether you're an engineer, whether you're professional services, an IT, they all suck at selling. And the reason why is because two things. One is mindset, because we look at sales as a negative connotation, and we often look at this is what you do to people, and it's manipulative, it was high pressure. In fact, my biggest shift was realizing that that's what sales is absolutely not about. Sales is actually about being more consultative. It's about being customer centric. It's about how you serve and how you help people be more profitable in ways they've never thought of. And so if you want to sell more and convert more leads at a higher rate, stop selling and start consulting. The big shift here was mindset. Mindset's 80% of success. So if you move from sales being something of high pressure, pushy, car salesman, to trusted advisor, consultative selling, and customer centric, that's a big shift in not only mindset, but in the way you're selling. At the end of the day, consultative selling is a strategy, and the strategy behind it is enhancement of client profits. And anyone can get there by realizing that sales is about having a process and it's about being consultative. The other big shift in thinking was sales was a system. And a lot of companies out there that are technically minded have systems like engineering systems, accounting systems, architectural systems, but they've never stopped and looked at their business as professionally as they do their professional skill set. They've never systemized the front end of the business. And it's the most pointy part of any business, right? It's the old notion of nothing happens until someone makes a sale. And so it didn't make sense for me that a lot of professional businesses that were selling technical products and services just didn't systemize the front end in sales. And many of those companies that were going bust, whether they're tradespeople, technical businesses, or the businesses that were worked in 20 years that had stagnated and they weren't growing, the number one thing I noted was they're just being too casual about sales. They weren't systemizing sales. They had the wrong approach, the wrong attitude, and the wrong mindset. And for me, that was the big aha moment. That was the thing I wanted to solve in the world, was how to put strategic sales systems into businesses and change the mindset of what selling's about to help technical businesses go from where they are to create momentum so sales was repeatable, predictable, and profitable. There I was, I'd gone from a sales engineer, and my next job was key account manager at one of the top 50 companies in the world, which was Tyco Electronics. I had this burning desire to learn more. The more I started to learn, the more I knew I didn't know. Part of my development when I was at Tyco is I put myself through university, and I must have been in my early 30s back then. I had this sensational appetite to learn more about business. So I did a postgraduate diploma of business administration. A lot of the subjects that I was learning were more entrepreneurial. They were marketing, new business ventures, franchising. I sat in a franchising class, and this was the inspiration that created the burning desire to grow a global brand. So I'm sitting in a lecture theatre, new class, new lecturer turns up. The lecturer walks into the room. He's a tall man in his 60s, sort of wispy grey hair, walks into the lecture theatre, and he says this: "Here's the problem with most business owners." And I leant in and I thought, this is going to be great. This is awesome. And he says, "We think too small. We're just not thinking big enough." And I was like, yeah, this is true. And then he said, he posed a few questions that changed the course of the rest of my life. First question, he said, "Name a franchise in New Zealand." And of course, everyone was naming the franchises: McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, you name it, all the common ones. And then he said, where did they originate from? USA, UK. Okay, there was probably one Australian one there. And then he said, name one that started in New Zealand and went globally. Okay, everyone started looking around for the answers. No one had the answers. And then when we looked back at the front of the room, he said, and that's my point. And then he said this word, and I still remember it, and it just engaged me for the rest of the trimester, the rest of the year, and for the rest of the 20 years that I'm sitting in front of you right now. And he said this: imagine. Such a powerful word. Imagine starting a global business from little old New Zealand and taking it to the world, because the world's the big place. And that was it. That was me, hook, line and sinker. All I could think about was growing a global brand from little old New Zealand, from the spare bedroom in South Auckland. And I sat there and I wrestled this down for 3 months. It was like, what is this business? What could I grow? And that was literally the start of the next 20 years. So within a few weeks of the lecturer giving me that inspiration to grow a global brand, I was at a friend's party and I was talking to this complete stranger, and we're having a deep, meaningful conversation. And then he turns to me and he says, I know why you're here. And I went, yeah, it's Nick's birthday. And he goes, no, I know why you're here. And I went, well, who else's birthday is it? Like, he goes, no, I know why you're here on the planet. I was like, whoa, one of those conversations. Great. And he said this to me: you're here to make a difference. And that really just That's really just sunk in really deeply, because it's one of those life hacks where someone gave me my purpose in life. Don't even know what his name was, don't know who he was. Some random stranger gave me a gift, and it really resonated with me. So I had the inspiration of growing a global business that was purpose-led to really make a difference. So I had the privilege of starting with a blank piece of paper. I had this blank piece of paper and I said, Paul O'Donoghue, what is it that you're passionate about? Because I was reading a lot of self-help books back then, and it's one of those old cliches, if you find what you're passionate about, you'll never work a day in your life. And I really leant into that, and I went, you know what? I hate being an electrician. I love sales. I love working with people. I love help growing companies. And so I literally wrote down on a piece of paper everything I was passionate about. And the word sales came out: strategy, training, assessment, and recruitment. And I looked down at the piece of paper and went, that's it. That is something that I'm really, really good at, all of those aspects. That is something I'm passionate about. And that is something that I believe I could commercialize into this global brand. What happened was this acronym jumped out of the page and it said STAR: strategy, training, assessment, recruitment. And I went, hey, that's better than the other acronym, which was RATS. And I knew a thing or two about marketing, and I thought, sales rats isn't going to cut it. So SalesSTAR, that's the meaning behind the brand. And when I looked at this acronym STAR, it took me a little while to actually land on what it was in terms of what the company was. And at that time, it wasn't sales training, so it's straight out sales training. It was sales development. In turn, it became a sales transformation company. What it is that I've used the same skill sets as an electrician to really help struggling businesses get really clear on their sales systems so they can scale in a more profitable way. How so? So let me just link these things. As an industrial electrician, as a sales engineer, I was privileged enough to go to a lot of manufacturing companies up and down the country. And what I was looking for is inefficiencies in their production lines. So my job selling variable speed drives was to look at how to optimize their conveyors, optimize every part of their process. Now, the thing as an industrial electrician, when a piece of plant or industrial equipment breaks, you can't go through a process of elimination. You've got to get the right testing equipment, the right analysis equipment. You've got to be able to plug it into these sophisticated industrial machines to determine what the problem is. Now, I took that mindset into SalesSTAR. So very quickly in the journey of SalesSTAR, I started having conversations with businesses that were struggling. They were stagnated. They were CEOs that were frustrated. They were playing CEO whack-a-mole. They tried changing out their sales managers. They tried recruiting new salespeople. They tried different methodologies and processes, and nothing seemed to work. And so what I decided to do was partner with a company that had decades of experience at analyzing sales organizations. So remember, the A in SalesSTAR stands for assess. So we decided to take the approach of first diagnose, then prescribe. So for the last 2 decades, we've been part of one of the biggest research projects in the history of sales. We've partnered with this company called Objective Management Group, where we've got the analytics, we've got the insights to really diagnose what's going on in any sales organization. We're assessing the leadership, we're assessing strategy, process, systems, and people. So I think a lot of companies are flying blind because they don't have the data and they don't really have the insights into what's going on in their sales systems to really understand what's broken, what's holding them back, and what levers to pull for them to scale. And so one of the big breakthroughs here is us having really good tools to analyze and assess any company. So one of the big breakthroughs after working with a multitude of companies for over a decade was patterns. For us, we've been consistently growing companies on an average of 37%. There are a lot of companies where we've quadrupled their revenue within a couple of years. The thing about that is we started to recognize a pattern. We would assess the organization so we could find out what the bedrock of the issues were, and that mitigated a lot of uncertainty for CEOs. they now had the clarity and the confidence on what to do to really scale up their business. So what we noted is that a lot of companies, in fact 95% of companies, don't have a strategic sales system. They don't have a strategy that's simple and compelling. Their sales team aren't aligned in that strategy, and then their process doesn't dovetail into their strategy, and their people aren't on the same page. For example, in many companies we go to, Johnny's done a little sales course here, Mary's done a different sales course somewhere else. Everyone's doing their own thing. As an upshot of that is their sales is consistently inconsistent. So it's very difficult for a sales leader and a manager to manage people who are doing different methodologies, and they don't have a common laid out milestone centric sales process. So long story short, we've got the inspiration in the business, purpose driven business, also value led, but that's another story for another day. But we needed to make progress, and we wouldn't have made progress if we didn't have really good, robust sales systems. And that's been my observation. Companies fail to scale in a consistent way without really good strategic sales systems. Now, we've been able to take our 9-step framework, and we've worked with about 600 companies globally now. We've taken a little brand from South Auckland, New Zealand, and now we're in Australia, the UK, Spain, Sweden, Mexico, USA, and Canada. Now, I wouldn't have been able to realize my ambitions to grow a global brand if we didn't have good strategies and good sales systems, and obviously good people along the way. But the insights that I've drawn from that, and just remember, this started out as a frustrated electrician asking, is there a better way? Is there a better way to sell? Is there a better way than having high pressure sales techniques, turning that into a system that helps companies scale? Now, we've been able to take the 9 steps, and we've worked with every major industry across 8 countries in the last 20 years. We work from smaller companies under $1 million to $3 million, but typically we work with companies from 5 million to 100 mil. But we've also worked with billion-dollar companies. We've worked with just about every major industry that you could think of, and we've had the privilege of working with some of the leading companies within those industries. For example, we work with the #1 group home builder in Australia and New Zealand, and their bottleneck is they didn't have a unified process, and they've had hundreds of salespeople working for them. And do you know what? There's not 100 different ways on how to sell. There's one common best practice. So we had to pull this company in together, and we worked out the gold standard way of them selling a new home. And what that did was it enabled them to grow by 40%, even though they were already the #1 player in New Zealand and Australia. Another example is we work with a company that is an architectural company in the States, and this is a company that was 50 years old. And the thing is, the first year they grew by 53%, and in the second year they grew by 64%. And then when I asked the founders what was their growth projection that they had budgeted for, and they said 7%. And I was curious to know where they got 7% from, and it's because they've been around for 50 years. They'd only grown by 7% year on year for 50 years. So it was one of those, the stories of their past was predicating their future. So they could only see into the future what their past results had been. And so the bottleneck for them was just a radical way in thinking about their strategy. So it was dialing into their most profitable clients and really identifying who those clients that they should be working with, that they could scale quickly. The other shift with them in terms of their bottleneck was how they were selling. They were typical architects that wanted to showcase what they were doing and tell people about how great they were, which sounds very common. It's a common trait to anyone selling a technical product or service. They want to rely on their technical prowess and really showcase their ability to be that technically minded guru. But that's not what selling's about. Selling is actually about asking consultative questions to become the trusted advisor, really understanding what your clients' needs are, what their goals are, and what their biggest problems are. And if you can help them achieve their goals and solve the problems, that's how you make a sale. And so this architectural company went from 7% growth to growing by over 100 whatever percent, 53% and 64%. in the 2-year time frame that we work with them. There's been many tough times in the business, things that I haven't predicted in our strategy. Like I didn't predict the global financial crisis. I didn't predict the pandemic, the recent COVID pandemic. All of these things teach you a lesson. So really, good leaders are found in time of war, not time in peace. So having that resilience and having a good mindset helps. But the key to getting through all of this was having good visibility of our sales systems, having a really good, predictable pipeline that consistently produces profitable results was one of those key milestones. And I think that is the health of any company is typically predicated by the health of their pipeline. And you can really improve the health of your pipeline by looking at your sales in stages and determining if you've got clear milestones with clear methodology and your salespeople are following the process to make it repeatable and predictable. And if you're managing that pipeline, it becomes something that you can rely on that consistently churns out good results at the end of the day. The pipeline should be based on science, not gut feel. Too many salespeople go, look, this is about a 90% chance of winning. But when you overlay your sales process on the actual deals and you can determine with science the steps in each stage of your process, it becomes repeatable and it becomes predictable. It becomes a reliable part of your business that you can actually forecast deals winning, deals closing, and revenue coming into your business. And at the end of the day, the times where it's been the darkest in the business is when I've had no visibility of my pipeline and pipelines that I can't rely on. I've literally sat there in bed awake at night thinking about where am I going to pay the staff, where I'm going to pay the rent, how I'm going to put food on the table. In the early stages, it was because I didn't have a reliable pipeline that I could really forecast and take to the bank to bet on. So for example, it's all about having a good, healthy pipeline that you can forecast on. We know that when we've got a certain amount of deals at closing stage, 38% of those deals will close within 34 days because that's our average sales cycle. So when you actually have got the science behind sales success, when you've got every part of your sales system nailed with conversion ratios, with the data, you're going to have the right data to be able to predict future results. The thing I'm the most proudest about is actually taking a thought bubble that was in my head, a bit of inspiration, with starting with the end in mind. I wanted to grow a global business, and 20 years later, here I am. We're in 8 countries. We've actually grown a pretty significant brand, and we are winning our own share against some of the industry leaders that have been around for a lot longer than we have. Another thing I'm proud of is just the culture that we've built. We've attracted really good people and we've got a great culture, and I believe a lot of that was determined on just having a really clear purpose and a really clear, compelling vision. One of our core values at SalesSTAR is better never stops. And I believe in continuous improvement. I'm always learning, and I think the more you learn, the more you earn. It doesn't matter where you are in business, you can always be better. You could be the top salesperson, and there's always more you can get out of the top performers. Trust me, I've worked with thousands of top performers all around the world. You could be doing well in business, but the question is can you be doing better? That's the challenge, and here's the problem with most businesses. Most businesses don't know what the actual problem is. And my experience, there's always leaks within your sales system that can be causing you millions of dollars of lost opportunities. Now the question is do you want to get better? Do you have leaks in your system? If you're curious to know about how you can find out, well, we've made it pretty easy. We've got a 15-minute blueprint to scale session where we can diagnose your 9 steps on your strategic sales system and give you really just candid, honest view about what's holding you back and, of course, how you can be better to really rapidly grow and scale your business. Long story short, I just want to finish off by saying and unpacking some of the insights that I've learned in business. I definitely think that thinking big is the same amount of energy as thinking small. It's a choice at the end of the day. I've decided to think big and grow a global business from little old South Auckland. And I'm nowhere near where I should be at the moment, but it's bigger than most people that have thought small. So the choice is yours. The second thing is that just believe in yourself. Like, don't believe in what other people's opinions of you are. Like, just lean into it. For me, what I learned was someone has to be the best in the world, and why can't it be me? So again, that is just a mindset shift. Having a goal is one thing, but having the right systems, the right process, and taking the right actions will help you get to that goal. One of my learnings in the 20 years is that you could have the best product or the best service in the world. You can be a technical expert, but the thing is, you can't sell a secret. At some stage, someone in your business has to sell something. And it all starts with the front end of your business, which is selling. And you can't scale something that isn't systemized. So the biggest advice would be to get clear on your strategic sales system to help support the growth of your business. If I unpack 20 years of business and where I've got to today, really one of the key things is to have a clear vision of where you're going. And so for me, that vision was a big, bold vision to grow a global brand. And that's been quite magnetic. It's like JFK saying back in the 60s, we're going to put a man on the moon. Not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Then NASA had to go, great story, how the heck do we do this? Well, it's one of those stories because every time I tell new people coming into the business that we're growing this global brand and that we're going to be the number one and empowering our coaches to get transformational results for our clients, number one in the world that is, people galvanize and it's magnetic. So just having that clear purpose and a big, bold vision has enabled me to attract A players. The other thing too is having a great culture. We've got 5 core values in the business that we live and die by, and that's helped really attract like-minded individuals. So we've got a clear purpose, we've got the values, we've got this vision. The last piece of the puzzle was really getting the momentum in your business. One thing to have this talk about the vision and the purpose, but someone somewhere has to take action, and that action really is driven by good sales systems. So when you have good sales systems, it enables people and us as a company to do the right action on a daily basis to get momentum, to get a flywheel moving in the business. And when you've got that flywheel turning, it picks up momentum, it gets faster and faster and faster. Next minute you go from South Auckland to New Zealand to Australia to the UK to Sweden to Mexico to the USA to Canada, and bang, next minute you're global. So if you don't have good sales system and your sales is all over the place and you're taking a casual approach to it and you're wanting to create a flywheel, you're wanting to create predictable, repeatable and profitable results, I really highly recommend looking at your sales systems and really bedding that down so you can scale and you can have the confidence that your business is going to grow predictably, and you can rest easy at night knowing that there's cash coming on the door and you can predict future success. We started this story at Ford Motor Company, and I think it's fitting to end with the founder of Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford himself. Now, Henry Ford said this. He said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're 100% right.